Welcome to Conversations on Resilient Leadership. I'm Jim de Vries, founder of Enhance International Group, and your host for today's episode. This podcast series is where we dive deep into the leaders who have not only navigated through uncertainty, but have emerged stronger, more innovative, and more resilient. Whether you're a seasoned executive or an emerging leader, each episode offers you unique access to the strategies and insights of top leaders who have been redefining leadership in today's dynamic environment. Today, we have the privilege of sitting down with a remarkable leader, Gerry Vos, chairman of Gerry Vos LLC. He's from the great city of New York, and it's interesting, he's Dutch, and that since the Dutch founded New York, he's back to his second home country, I guess. Gerry was born and raised in the Netherlands. He has more than 40 years of international business experience, which includes an in-depth knowledge of world economic and geopolitical trends. After moving permanently to New York in 1998, he utilized his deep familiarity with U.S. and European culture to specialize in building strategic relationships with small and mid-sized companies across the Atlantic and throughout the world. Gerry graduated in 1978 with a BBA from Nijrode University in the Netherlands and is fluent in English, Dutch, German, and conversational in French, because you got to order the good food, right?
You bet.
Over the past 40 years, he has built a strong, high-level executive global network. He successfully analyzes critical business requirements, identifies deficiencies and potential opportunities, and puts professional teams together to achieve the most profitable business outcomes. After starting his career in sales with IBM, he soon switched to the financial markets, becoming an institutional broker at E.F. Hutton, and later at Prudential Bot, and as a managing partner at Brahm and Company, in market making, a specialist firm. He was responsible for their Amsterdam and London operations. Then he went to play some key management roles, organizing and improving the Mies Pearson Capital Management, Fortis Investment Worldwide Asset Management Trading Team in the U.S. His career led him to the ING, Furman Cells, to Brown Brothers, Harriman, Fulcrum, and CRT Capital. He is an advisory board member of the European IoT company Dunanet. In the past few years, he has concentrated on agricultural technology, regenerative agriculture, bio-based and biodegradable plastics, and innovative technologies with high-impact environmental practices. Gerry, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking the time today. And your initial thoughts on resilient leadership before we get into it.
Thank you. Glad to be here. My initial thoughts on resilient leadership. Oh, there are many. I think it has a lot to do with personality. I think a resilient leader is very good in listening and keeps himself abreast of what's going on, not only in the firm he or she works, but what's going on in the country, what's going on in the world, and try to interpret that to the advantage of your leadership, steering the company in the right way. I think that would be, in a nutshell, how I would describe resilient.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So with all that, you gave the definition of resilient leadership, but what does it mean to you personally in the way that you've conducted yourself over the last few years?
I've always liked to be a leader, I think. Maybe when I was younger, it was unconscious. As soon as I started to go to college and university, it came more to the forefront. The reason I think it was unconscious is simply because of the place where I was born. It was a very, very small town of 200 people right next to the slaughterhouse of my father. And that was basically my hometown for the first 18 years of my life. Thanks to my dad's business, I learned a lot about the world. It was close to Germany, but as soon as I started going to college, the people that studied with me came from totally different backgrounds than me. Never thought about it, but their parents weren't even in the Netherlands for half the year because they were either working for Shell somewhere in Africa or, in Brazil, all those kind of things. And that's how I got to get a broader view of the world. So that led me to slowly but surely understand that I can do some leadership. Having said that, I'm not the guy who pats himself on the chest. I just kind of do what I think I have to do, and then people either follow or they don't. But in most cases, I learned that they were willing to work with me and make something happen.
A lot of people talk about management and leadership, and there's a difference between the two. How would you define the difference between managing people and leading people?
Let's start with the first one. Managing people to me is much more taking care of the day-to-day business and guide everybody as much as you can in the right direction. Support the people in what they do. In other words, manage them. Support them in that they feel comfortable. You learn something about their private lives and stuff like that. And so get that all together to make them feel comfortable. When that is managing, when there is something happening, whatever it is, supply chain issues or those kind of things, then you try to manage yourself and the company through it. When it comes to leadership, I think that to me means the word strategic comes in. It is taking a much longer view of where you want to be and want to go with your company or the company you work for. It's not so much on a day-to-day basis, but it's building the roadblocks towards a long-term view, and that requires leadership much more than managing, in my book.
So many people on their journey, the young folks that are out there, and they may be managing today and they aspire to be a leader. What are some of the transitions or turning points, in a person's career when they start moving more from managing and moving more towards leadership?
I think it requires that you've been around a little bit, having listened to co-workers, see your current managers operate. To give you an example, and it's the one thing I never forgot. When I started at E.F. Hutton, I think I was 24, 25, and there were people who were 35, 40, 45, and there was nothing better than that they paid a little attention to me. And that kind of sparked your self-confidence and those kind of things. So it's the one thing I've never forgotten when I now run into younger people who ask a question or pay attention and they want to learn. At least the ones who want to learn, obviously, they do with it what they want to do. By learning those kind of things and talking to people who've been around longer, I think you can learn. But the one thing is, it's not going to happen overnight. It takes time. It takes some time to sleep on. I'm not a big believer in setting your whole resume when you're in college. I want to do this for 5 years. I want to do, well, it's not even 5 years these days. I want to do this for a year and that for a year, and then I want to do a sabbatical. And there's one thing that comes at you, and that's life. So you got to take your time and roll with the punches. And of course, you can set goals. You should have goals, but be prepared for deviating from those goals simply because life is coming at you.
Life never goes as planned. If you make a plan, you're not going that way, right?
Right. It's one of those things I've always said about the economy. If you want to analyze the economy, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, right? And you get all the different pieces. The one thing you have to realize as soon as you almost finish the puzzle, you might as well throw it out and start with the next one, because so many things have changed that you have to build a new puzzle. So, and I think if you look at it that way, it kind of strengthens you in becoming flexible and different thoughts, and because making that puzzle, you always have to ask yourself, am I on the right track here? Okay, I'm on the right track. If I'm wrong, I'll find out, but let's go forward with this.
Mhm.
So that's the idea.
I like that. I like the life is like a puzzle, but the puzzle changes. And you got to
Absolutely.
be prepared for a different complexion of that picture that
Yes,
you're putting together.
yes,
That's a
and
great analogy.
there's nobody. Well, yeah, I would say with pretty high certainty, there's nobody who's escaping this. Uh,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
as soon as it seems like anytime I'm comfortable with the puzzle,
Mhm.
a new canvas comes out. And
Exactly.
the puzzle maker is making a new puzzle for me to figure out.
Right. And that goes for your life as well as for your business,
Yeah,
or the business you're in.
I love that. That's a fantastic analogy. Thank you for that. So when we talk about leadership, you know, obviously we look at other leaders for inspiration. Could be personal or could be other leaders out there. Are there any leaders that you've looked at and said, gee, I've taken some notes from them and tried to emulate some of them?
Oh, absolutely. The first one would be my dad. Not that he ever told me anything about the stock market or the economy, but the way he just, I mean, he was raised in the Depression. So it was a different attitude towards work, but very, very hard worker, enormous work ethics. And he was able to talk to anyone and made a point of it to talk to anyone. I mean, we lived next to the slaughterhouse, and he was one of the four brothers that ran the place. But on Friday afternoon, when everybody was cleaning up, he would pick up a broom and help them clean up. That's the way he was, and it's that to me. Everybody's got a place. It doesn't matter. I sometimes these days give the example, if you work on the 45th floor on Rockefeller Center, the guy who sits behind the front desk, if he doesn't open the door of Rockefeller Center, nobody's going to do anything. So that guy is important, and probably as important as you are, for opening the door and make sure that you can work. Going back to my dad, if you went on holiday with him, be it Spain or Portugal, whatever, he didn't speak the language, but he was always up early, and by 7 o'clock you could see him talking with hand and feet to the pool boy. You know that, and
I love that.
so I've taken a lot from that,
Yeah.
and learned a lot from that. Besides the fact that he was from a very big family, how to deal with all that kind of stuff. The
Yeah.
other person, more, I don't know him, is Satya Nadella from Microsoft. Maybe that's also because, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later, my European background. He seems to be there for, I mean, it's a much bigger organization, but he seems to be there for people, has an interest in people.
Yeah.
Compare that a little bit to my dad on a different level, but still, I learned that in the years at Microsoft, he had I think a paraplegic son, or who ultimately died.
Mm,
And just a soft spoken, very knowledgeable guy, because I'm sure he knows exactly what he wants to do with Microsoft, or where he wants to be.
sure.
Going back to the leadership and the management, right? I think he's more in the leadership than the management side. And the other thing, Jim, is he's been there for 8 or 10 years.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting that you had Bill Gates, and then, oh, forget his name, but he's only the third
He's only the third
CEO,
guy there.
and I think that tells you something about what's the word, the atmosphere and all that kind of stuff at Microsoft.
Yeah, he seems to be very approachable. I just talked to one of my old friends, and he's working there now, and he said that he's already met him, and he said it's unbelievable that he's already met him.
Right.
And he's just such an approachable person, to your point. And like your dad, I mean, the approachability and in that they treat everybody with respect, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is that, to me at least, is absolute key, especially in this day and age with all the technology, the AI, and you name it. Just
Hmm.
the personal thing. I just heard someone say he's teaching his kids right now who have jobs and starting to deal with AI and all that kind of stuff, especially those jobs where AI is becoming very important, or more, it's taking over more and more. Is that I tell my kids, look at your job, find out what AI cannot do, at least not in the next few years, as far as you can tell, and be darn good at that, because then you can survive the job.
Yeah.
And I would say that's where the personal relationships come in. And I think there's no way of doing business if there is not a personal relationship, at least
Mhm.
not in my book. It's very important to me.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to be more productive if you care about your coworkers and they care about you.
Absolutely.
You'll have each other's back. That's a much more productive environment for everybody, and everybody's happier. I mean, we all know that if people are happy in their job, you get a boost of productivity between 10 and 20%. It's been proven time and time again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
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 maybe
co-
that's why America's, hopefully we remain happy.
I left IBM, and they all said, well, how can you leave IBM
Yeah.
after a year and a half? Great company, all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And on top of that, I was taking a salary cut of 25%. And I
Hmm.
said, well, listen, this is great, but I think I have an opportunity here. I love the E of Hutton, the economic stuff, and all that kind of stuff, all those
Hmm.
kind of things. And I'll see what happens.
Yeah.
The good news for me was when I started at E of Hutton and I was paid in dollars, it
Hmm.
was 225 against the guilder.
Uh-huh.
And when I left 3 years later, it was 390.
Well, that's a
I
raise.
got an automatic raise every month. Every month. So, again, you never know how life comes at you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So I know that over the years, you moved into advising a lot of leaders in your jobs, right? You worked with a lot of leaders. Can you share a little bit what enabled that? What do you enjoy in that?
Yeah, well, in Holland, in the first whatever 20 years of my professional life, I worked, manager, leader, like we were just describing, and getting through the whole thing. And then in '98, I decided that I wanted to go to the US. And so I came here. I had many contacts through my work at Fortis Investments. We were giving out orders to all the brokers, so they love to help you and stuff like that. So I found a job through someone at ING, and that worked because it was a Dutch company. So I could get an E2 visa, and the rest is history. What that did was it changed. I wasn't concentrating on management at the time. My whole concentration was from moving from Europe to the US. And that's it's a big deal.
Sure.
A lot of people don't realize that, but it is a big deal because you don't know anybody, you have
Yeah.
no family, you have no alma mater, you don't know anything about sports. I mean the rules or the names and it's a trading desk where I started, and everybody was talking about the game of last night and all that. So you have to pick up on that. The weather is different, the climate, you're all day in air conditioning, all that kind of stuff. It takes you 2 years. It's that
Oh
simple.
yeah.
It takes you at least 2 years. And so when I came here, what struck me, well, I was thinking about it before we started the call. Basically, in America, the glass is half full, where in Europe, it's much more the glass is half empty. Europeans are probably not as big risk takers as the Americans. I'm generalizing.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense.
And risk taking might not even be the word. I think opportunity.
Mhm.
Grabbing an opportunity. And there are some simple things that I look at. And when I worked for Fortis, and one of the asset managers came up to my desk, he whispered in my ear, "Buy me 100,000 Royal Dutch," so that nobody could hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So he was afraid that the price would move away if
Yeah.
everybody knew about it and stuff like
Yeah.
that. You come to a US trading desk, "I've got 500,000 IBM for sale," so that the whole room could hear it.
Yeah.
And initially I thought, well, why is he doing that? And then, because it's a big order and all that
Yeah.
kind of thing. Well, first of all, it's a huge market, so he wasn't going to spoil his market.
Yeah.
Secondly, by yelling it out, maybe someone else could find a buyer, and then they had 2 times commissions. So that was the whole spiel spiel is not the right word, the whole thing at the trading desk. So that was an enormous getting used to, and always looking for opportunity. And that goes, another example is if there's a big weather event in this country, be it a tornado, be it whatever, flooding, stuff like that. I see the houses people live in and how little preparation for an event like that.
Yeah.
That wouldn't happen so much in Europe. There's much
Right.
more insurance kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Why would I buy a safety cellar for a tornado, which might happen in the next 50 years? Why do I have to spend $6,000 on that? That's a waste of money. I'll see what comes at me. And that also results in Americans going very quickly, okay, this is terrible, but we got to rebuild, we got to do this, blah, 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 and move on. So been busy with that. But I'm veering away from your question about the leaders. I didn't have the drive to become a leader in the financial world. At least here in this country, there were too many. It was a totally different kind of business, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm probably too nice for that world, especially when it comes to the trading and those kind of things. Although I had an absolute wonderful time at all these desks, wonderful people, lots of laughs, politically totally incorrect, but that that made it very interesting. Since I started for myself and talking to people, I've been basically telling my experiences, and I think my best gift in that is that I can listen. And I keep telling people, listen, you got to talk to me, because if I don't know what you're doing, what you want, and how you're thinking, I'm not able to help you or come up with something that might help you, or, those kind of things. So having done that over the last 14 years, I've met lots of people, 80% nada, nothing, connected, stuff like that. but the internet is my friend. I've learned a lot. I could figure things out. One of the things when I started the business for myself was, okay, I want to learn something new every day, even if it's a new button on the computer or whatever, So,
I hear trust in there,
yes,
is gaining people's trust.
totally. It's the most important thing. We both know a guy called Danny,
Yeah.
and he always tells the story. Oh, there used to be a time that you could do business on a handshake.
Yeah.
And yeah, going back to my dad, it was on a
Yeah.
handshake.
Same my dad too. Yeah.
A yes is a yes and a no is a no. And you wouldn't veer off unless you had very good reason, but then you would start talking to the person. And that's the other thing, Jim, trust. And throughout my career, whatever came about and all that kind, I can look everybody in the eye. Honesty was
Hmm.
very high up there with my
Yeah.
dad, and that is still there. And I might have mentioned it in one of our other conversations. In the financial business, I've learned how to write an email, or rather, what not to put in an email, because you couldn't promise anybody anything. And that's still, quote unquote, haunting me. When I write an email, there's no addressee in it or whatever. First, I write the email, finish it, because I might by accident press the send button. And if there's no address in it, then it doesn't happen. So that keeps me on the straight and narrow when I write my emails. But little sidestep from trust. Yeah, trust is
Yeah.
everything.
Well, I mean, that gets into emotion, you know, is there's positive emotion and negative emotion when you're writing those emails, right?
Yes, yes,
And maybe when you're have that negative emotion, you gotta take a step back.
absolutely. That's one of my other mottos. It pops in my mind when it comes to writing emails. I always tell people who ask me a question, can you do this and this or so and so? And I say, oh, it sounds like a wonderful story, but let me see how I wake up tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And that, and then if you're on the right track with that story and that person or not, or if you have more
Mhm.
questions or whatever. But it's important for me to sleep a night on it, and then how do I wake up? Because
Absolutely.
you
Nothing like a good night's sleep to
yeah,
mull over.
you take the stuff in, and yeah, it for me it works that way.
Yeah,
But
I'm with you.
that's the same thing as you say, you got positive, negative emails. There's nothing worse than immediately react to something, because, and that particularly I think goes for a person who grew up with the Dutch language, even
Mm,
though English basically from age 6 we learned English, because in Holland you had subtitles, so you could hear everything in the original language. But even that, going back to coming here, first day in the office at 5 o'clock, one of my colleagues says to me, "See you later." And I go, "No, I'm going home. I won't see you later." Not knowing that it
yeah,
was just such an ordinary expression in this country.
sure.
See you later. Maybe you see the person never again. That's
Mm,
not important, but that's
mm,
how it's done. So all these little things you have to learn and make yourself used to and stuff like that. So, and I love it. I absolutely love it.
yeah. Well,
Uh,
you remind me of when in doubt, don't take it personally. Give them the benefit of the doubt, and
Absolutely.
and take a pause and
Yeah.
be very positive in your response, and it will pay back in dividends.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and another story. I remember I came home one day and said, "Oh, my boss, he's so grumpy." And I was thinking it was about me.
Yeah,
It had nothing to do with me.
right.
So those kind of things that adds on to what you just said. They're very important to understand about yourself if you want to do anything, but especially if you want to be a leader.
Mm-hmm. So being a leader, now I'm going to switch it and say, what do you look for in other leaders when you're working with them?
Enthusiasm, not overly enthusiasm when it comes to startups and stuff like that. A real dose of enthusiasm. I've seen too many. Oh yeah, we're going to need $2 million, okay, and I'm not a big capital raiser. I've never, but I've been on the sidelines, and then I hear from a friend who raised the money for them half a year later and say, how they're doing. He said, well, to be honest, they're not using the money wisely. They're
Mm-hmm.
flying business class all the time. They're doing this, they're doing that. It's not general, but you gotta be serious about things. So that is important. If you work with someone, keep each other informed is very important. Be transparent as much as you can. I think that is a little bit what this day and age has done. Too many people, not too many, a lot of people are using what they're hearing to their own advantage. Kind of stealing is a big word, but people are very careful with telling other people what they're up to, what they're doing. But if you ask me to support you and think along with you, all bets are off. You gotta be transparent and all that kind of stuff. You want me to sign an NDA? I'll sign an NDA. That's not the problem. You don't need one because there's the trust issue again.
Absolutely.
So I think that is very important in other leaders. Also, when you look at people who have started companies and they're the CEO, what I'm looking for is that they ask themselves well, not over and over, on a regular basis, I founded this company, but am I the right person to be the CEO?
Yeah.
Maybe someone else is much better CEO than I am.
Mm-hmm.
And let me do the inventing and new codes and all that kind of stuff. And that's very hard to well, first off, to tell someone that, but for that person to admit that, hey, I built this company, so I'm the CEO.
Yeah.
I think is another part of great leadership. If you can have an open discussion, am I the best person to do this, or is someone else better? And if you have self-confidence, you can make those decisions.
Yeah. Business processes such as strategy, setting, financial reviews, and new product development. For the business you work with, which of those three tends to be the most difficult for folks to really get a good handle on?
Oh, I think the first and the last one is strategy setting and new product development. And when I say new product development, it's probably not so much to find a new product, especially in the technology world. A lot of products were developed and then found out if people wanted it, yes or no.
Okay. The go-to-market part of it.
To go to market part, and
Yeah.
instead of going the other way around, what is necessary, what is needed, and what can we do with that? So the financial part, I think, becomes more important if you're a bigger company, when you're more scrutinized by the potentially outside world and things like that. I mean, the big advantage of a family business is that if you have a bad year, nobody has to know, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have enough of a buffer, you can survive and make it right the next year or the year after. When you're a listed business, or then it becomes a whole different ballgame, especially here where you have to report every quarter.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the US obviously runs on quarters,
Yeah.
which means if you're running a US company, you have to be running in weeks, in months,
Yes.
Yeah, you got to be running fiscal week type to make your quarter. Can't make your quarter by hoping you make your months, right?
Right. That would be very difficult for me because I'm a much more long run
Yeah.
and try to build something for the longer term. But
Great, great. What are some of the most difficult challenges that you've had to overcome?
I have to go back to Europe where I took over a financial trading company, stocks and options, and the two owners sold out. We took over, four of us, five of us, something like that. I was in my early 30s, very excited to be involved, to have a stake in hey, my own business, and everything was on paper, all that kind of stuff. If one of the five would not like it and step out, the others would take over the shares, would buy the shares. That all went fine till the moment that someone stepped out and business was going, but not as good as people had hoped. And they pulled out of buying the shares
Yeah.
of that one person. And I bought them, but it kind of it gave, I don't know how to describe it, but it kind of made me uncomfortable in working with these people. And so and then it was Amsterdam and London. Then I had to close the London office
Mm.
because it didn't work, which was hard to do because it was still 25 people or 20 people. You have to tell people no longer, we can't give you a long big bonus or whatever. All those kind of that was a hard part in my business life. And what I ultimately did, I went to the bank that made the loan on my stock, and I said, hey, listen, I'm responsible as a manager, as a leader, to get the most out of it, but I can't do it. And I'd like to pull out. I can do it. Can you forgive my loan and take you have my stock as a collateral, take my stock and forget about it. Thank God they did. I pulled
Mhm.
out, and that was basically the end of that journey.
Mhm.
And that was, yeah, that was tough, especially as I started it with it, obviously, with a totally different vision. But dealing with the people, finding, and we already talked about it a little while ago, finding out about the people you work with. When everything goes hunky dory, oh yeah, no, I'm going to buy the shares, you're going to buy the shares, and that's all fine. But as soon as things go a little bit south, people become totally different characters very
Yeah,
quickly.
that's for sure.
Very quickly, because they see their investment not doing what they expected. That's painful. And it took me a while to find another job after that. But
Mm.
I did, and there you go.
Yeah. So the next job you took, was it the job that you wanted, or was it a stepping stone job?
No, it was a job that was brought to me. Someone called me and said, "Hey, Mace Pearson, they're looking for the manager of their trading desk. Are you interested?" I said, "Oh, absolutely." So I went to talk and had another 2 or 3 interviews, and they gave me the job. And that was a challenging but very interesting job. That was just after the merger of ABN and AMRO. And Mace was the merchant bank of ABN, and Pearson was the merchant bank of AMRO. So they came together. Besides that, my job was challenging with 4 or 5 people that I worked with. Yeah, maybe it was 6, whatever. The two cultures around you had to merge.
Yeah.
Uh, and I mean, I was there for a week, Jim, and there were about, I think total group was like 600 or 700 people, something like that. I didn't know these people, but I could
Mhm.
walk through the corridor and say, oh, he's ex Mace and he's ex Pearson. I
Mm.
mean, totally different cultures. You could just tell.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very interesting job because we had business to give out to the brokers. So all the brokers were at my doorstep. Gerry, we want to talk to you. And I remember the guy from Goldman Sachs came over from London. Oh, he called me and he said, I want to buy you dinner. I said, no, you're not going to buy me dinner. I'll first come to the office, I'll meet you, and we'll do some business, and then we'll have dinner. That was my upbringing from IBM, because at IBM you couldn't take anybody out for lunch to get an order. So,
Uh-huh.
and that set very well with me because it keeps you on the straight and narrow of doing honest business. That's what it is for me.
So is there a lesson in there of sometimes you don't know what you want, but sometimes it comes to you in a way that you didn't expect?
In that job, yes,
Yeah.
it goes a little bit to, I think, what I experience now is that people, after all these years that I'm building relationships in this country, they're coming back to me now. I sometimes get nervous when I've met someone for the first time, or nervous, but I go home and I say to myself, did I do the right job? Did I say the right thing? Or was I too aggressive?
Mm-hmm.
I know if I think I was too aggressive, I'm totally fine because it's not aggressive by anyone. When I feel, it's fine. So I think I'm blessed with having, at least I think I'm blessed with it, with that kind of personality, and that lingers on with people, and then they come back, and that's how it happened with the job I got in Holland. This guy I'd spoken to several times a couple of years before, and he got the question, "Do you know anybody?" And the
Mm.
rest is history. So but that was wonderful, and that was ultimately my jumping board to come to the US.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a turnaround story, so to speak, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah. Well, yeah, I think so. I think so. And well, it underscores many things that we've discussed before. You can't plan it. Life takes its path.
Yeah. So switching gears a bit here on the state of the state, obviously a lot going on in the world. And the question is, if you're a business owner, right? That's really the underlying question here is, with all these things going on, how many of those things going on politically and global economics or macroeconomics, you would say, are actually affecting the microeconomics of what's happening to run a business? I think that's the question out there. I think probably depending on the size of your company, it's going to obviously affect you more. But
Sure.
what are your thoughts on that?
Well, here's where I try to start thinking strategically and try to figure out what the pieces of the puzzle are, as we discussed earlier. And to me, there are a few things that there's definitely a big change in the world, right? We had, since World War II, the US was kind of protecting the waterways, opened their markets, everybody could export to the US, and as long as they were against Russia with them. And then everything was fine. So that kind of changed. The wall came down, all those kind of things. And so there are two very important things from that as a result from that era. The first one is demographics. That is changing dramatically. And the other
Mm.
one is the dollar.
Mm.
It's all about the dollar. It's
Yeah,
always
it
the
is.
dollar. And
Yes,
I'm
it
not
is.
talking about the value of the dollar or all those kind of things, because there is this separate thing. The dollar is the euro dollar.
Yeah.
It's basically all the dollars held outside the US by US banks or foreign banks. And it is still the case that if Australia buys something in China, it's very likely that they pay in dollars, and that whole system has created that Japan got dollars from the past. The oil countries, they are getting paid in dollars with their oil. But when they have the dollars, oh, what am I going to do with the dollars? I can lend them out and all that kind of stuff. So everybody has debt in dollars. So if there's economic problems, they in those countries they start buying dollars, which only makes it worse because the dollars become more expensive, the interest rates go up, and the whole shebang. At the same time, in Europe, you see big changes in demographics. It goes down. Well, China goes down very fast. Japan, we know already. Europe is following pretty rapidly as well. And then the third thing I'm looking at, and that's a puzzle I'm trying to make at the moment, is the reaction to climate change. Because if you start thinking about it, that all the countries that lost their governments lately, well, not all of them, but many countries that lost their governments lately, nobody says it, but climate regulations play a big role.
Yes.
Germany,
For sure.
is three times as high, and here basically
because they refuse to use nuclear power. So
that's right.
And they're worried about climate impacts of nuclear power.
Right. Canada was also a big one in the climate policies. The Netherlands, they have a different, and then of course we're back to demographics with the immigration and all that kind of stuff is another part of the puzzle. But people are, it's what I say about the food inflation that everybody talked about. Price of eggs was the big thing here, and you and I don't care, because if we have to pay $6 for a dozen egg, and it goes up to $8, we might think, oh, wow, that's a big raise. We still buy the dozen eggs. But if you live from paycheck to paycheck, it becomes very difficult. So that makes those things all very important. And just this morning, I was listening to two guys who know a lot about Eurodollars and all that kind of stuff. And they were talking about it's not the level of the dollar because it's all relative. But the dollar going up is not good for a lot of countries in the world. It becomes too expensive. The loans become too expensive, all that kind of stuff. Now, our coming president doesn't want an expensive dollar because that is not good for trade. The countries who, if he puts on tariffs, it becomes even worse for these countries because they make less dollars. And I heard that the guy from Australia is happy to buy US Treasury bills for 4%, with 4%, because by the time the 90 days or the year is over, the Australian dollar has dropped in value by 6%, so he made 10%. So that's why the demand for dollars keeps coming. The Chinese invest in Australia, they invest in Canada. As soon as the Chinese start to say, because the Chinese are not doing very well, all that money has to come back, then it becomes a whole different ballgame. But back to the tariffs, these guys were suggesting, because of the high level of the dollar, that yes, we might get tariffs, but maybe we won't get them till next year. First have the dollar down and all that. I don't know if that's going to happen. That's politics and those kind of things. Last thing about tariffs, I think a lot of the tariffs, unless the percentages go absolutely crazy, are already in, because Biden didn't take out many of the tariffs that Trump had put in. And of course, the Mexico and Canada stuff, you get that. But I think there's a lot of rattling. I talk about tariffs because you need to do this and this for me. Do that, then we forget about the tariffs. Don't know if it's going that way, but I'm struggling with what a company should do. I don't know if yes, you can make long-term contracts, all that kind of stuff. The one thing I know, it's not going to happen all at once.
Yeah.
It's not going to be that the Panama Canal is all of a sudden, or all the tariffs are going to go on and all the workers are from California picked from the fields and stationed out of the country and stuff like that. That's not what's going to happen. So as a company, I think you have time to adapt and find your ways around it.
If you link this all, what you said, to inflation, I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because it just doesn't make sense to me that, we can see a decrease in inflation to where it's at appreciably.
Yeah,
It
well,
can't go back to what it was in 2020.
probably not, but you never know with the bird flu, right?
Yeah. But I
You
guess the point is as a whole, when you look at all inflation, we're really looking at inflation relative to it was last year
Yes.
or last month, a deflationary environment where we're negative inflation. I'd like to hear I have my thoughts on what would happen. What are your thoughts? What would happen if we actually went in that direction?
Well, the important thing is not so much the inflation level. It's what's going to happen with employment.
Mm.
And that looks pretty dire. If you look at the yield curve,
Mm-hmm.
and we've over the years, I think for the last whatever 70 years or whatever, if we've had an inverted yield curve, there's always a recession following it.
Yeah.
And this one has been very long and pretty deep. I think the difference between the 2-year yield and the 20-year yield was that the 2 years were, I don't know, 60 basis points higher, stuff like that. That has now reversed
Mm-hmm.
to a normal positive spread. That also happens every time, because then everybody thinks, oh, it's going to be fine. The inversion is gone. It's going to be fine. If you look at a lot of other indicators, I think the average credit card debt of the American is $6,000. Housing affordability is off the is simply it's not there.
It's not there.
They can't buy a house. Monthly interest rate payments are at very high levels, not seen in a long time. So as long as employment is keeping up, it's kind of okay. But once that starts to drop off, and I think it will, because the numbers have been very fickle, and if you look at a whole bunch of things, just this morning we had the JOLTS, the job openings. It was higher than expected, so they dropped the bond market again, stuff like higher yields, because there are lots of employers who advertise jobs 2 or 3 times. So the counting is not good. So I think we're going to see one more move in the stock market, because everybody is happy and, let's go for it. And nobody rings the bell at the top. And the reason I say one more move is a guy I follow who said in October of 22, when everybody was talking about, oh, the market is going down the drain and all that kind of stuff. He said, no, we're going to see new all-time highs. And he's been totally right. And his macro stuff makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm a bit of a contrarian. That's probably because I've been in the business. I saw your list. You send out the email. Maybe I missed it, but there's nobody negative on 2025.
No, there is nobody negative. Very few on that list from Bloomberg.
Right.
I
Sorry, go ahead.
was also pretty surprised that there was no negative on there.
And
how can that be?
exactly. After 2 years of 20% a year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how. I don't get it either.
Right.
I'm asking because it's not adding up in my mind.
Right. So that is why I start to wonder what will happen, and I think and the Fed, like the ECB, is behind the wagon as well. They raised rates too long
Yeah, they did.
because they were looking at inflation and not enough at employment, I think, but we'll see how that works out. The other thing
No,
is, Jim,
I,
what is going to play a role is technology. Basically, technology
yeah.
is deflationary.
I mean, we have to hit it. I mean, what I was thinking last year is, do we have to hit a deflationary era in order to rebalance?
Probably. Well, I mean, they're now talking about 40-year cycles, right? When
Yeah.
I worked for E.F. Hutton, I remember that must have been 1984 or something like that. Yeah, because the US, no, it was whatever. The US issued a 30-year 12 and three-quarter bond, and that was the highest level. It's been about 40 years since. And if you look at, I'll do it for you this way, how interest rates have come down, that finally we broke that trend.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that we're now off to the races. We're probably going to get one more down deflationary part. And then most likely, yes, we will have inflation come back. But we'll worry about that when we get there.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
I'm not super bullish. I think the market is in for trouble. And this one guy says, well, we've basically been in and don't misinterpret the word wrong, depression since the great financial crisis in 2009. And
mhm,
the reason he uses the word depression is that if growth had to be this, to be
mhm,
on the normal trajectory, it has been like this. And that goes for China, that goes for the US, that goes for Europe, that's everywhere. Because we started putting in so much money, and we're still working through that. We've given the governments have doled. I don't like that word. They have spent a lot of money on
print more
people.
money than what they have.
Yeah, and people saved a bit of that and all those kind of things. So we'll see how that goes. There's one little theory I have myself is why don't we see more individual problems in households and more people not having a job and
Well, there's so low unemployment, and the
yeah,
baby boomers are. I mean, we're going through a transition that really we have never seen before.
exactly.
So we're heading in down a path that's never been done before. I mean, we have all these people retiring and then living longer than they've ever lived before. So
Right.
eventually, it turns into a liquidity problem, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So the Fed is behind the wagon because they're gonna come back again
Yeah.
and put in money.
I think the companies that are mainly doing business in the US aren't going to see a lot of difference in what they have to do.
I agree.
I don't think they have to worry about too much either way. What they should be doing is looking for opportunities to grow
Mhm.
in their own markets and beat their competitors and make sure that nobody comes in from the outside to take their market share. But I do think that they need to think about being more competitive and use technology. What still flabbergasts me is the lack of adoption of technology for the small to medium sized businesses in the US. The technology, uh, at least our partners, is ROI is 6 to 12 months.
Mhm.
So if you're using that, obviously you're going to create a margin increase.
If we can find a way to make employees comfortable with technology as well, by showing them that it is not necessarily costing them their job. If the CEO is a good leader, he understands the people and they can make it happen. So I think increase in enthusiasm is definitely what we need.
Yeah, we do.
A good thing to think about how that can be done.
Yeah. Well, Gerry, this has been a treat for me. I could talk for hours with you.
Likewise, I really enjoyed it. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed it. I'm glad you invited me. I hope I've answered your questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Gerry.